This is SubQ, everything being the same, 9 IUs total. And here is the SubQ value, this solid line. So this peaks out at about 15, 16 maybe on average. That's SubQ. This peaks at like 37 or so for IM. That's a monstrous difference. It's like twice as much or more on average. All right. So if you look at area under the curve, which is a good way to see what is the exposure from the drug, how much is it going to affect your body? Obviously, if we filled in the area under this curve and figured out what that is, I think it's going to be smaller. It does come down more rapidly here. And I could go and look at this paper, but we definitely get a higher peak.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Blood, Sweat, and Gear with coaches Skip Hill, Andrew Barry, myself, Scott McNally, and we are joined by Mr. Muscle Minds himself, Scott Stevenson. What's going on, man?
You guys, baby. It's all about you.
The doctor is in the house.
Yes. For the ride. Tell me what I need to talk about.
Thank you for being here with us. Guys, all of our programming is brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK over there. You can get the Team Skip blend, which is it's nicer than just an ISO because it's got like a little bit of a thickness to it, a little bit of body to that protein shake. So when you're hungry on diet, it's going to fill you up for a little bit longer. Also, check out supplementsource.ca for our Canadians. And thank you to everybody from Patreon. I've got a couple Patreon questions today. We were going to launch into this thing with Scott talking about GH, growth hormone, and we can even screen share. I think you've got a slide or two. Basically, we talked about this the other week. The topic came up, should you, and I asked it, I was like, should you IM growth hormone? That's what I had done for years. And I definitely felt like I got the benefit of growth as far as as much as you can expect to get out of low dose, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, I'd always used it IM. And the thought was, hey, it's possible that the hormone could get damaged potentially by enzymes in the muscle, which that was something I hadn't heard before. Isn't that what we were told? Or that's the topic that came up?
Oh, yeah. That's true. I've heard, But I mean, that's not a common thought. That's just, I think I've only heard that from one person. Have you guys heard that before?
Well, regardless, we thought it'd be something cool to talk about. And I know that we had talked about it before on Muscle Minds. So we were like, let's do a crossover and let's get Scott on. And then that topic just happened to come up. So I figured.
Playing. I'm playing. You're just ignoring me. You're like, shut up, Skip. Let me get into this.
Let's get rolling. People tune in for the content. So, Scott, where do we want to start with this, man? Should we use our GH, SubQ?
So you tell me, there's two topics, and you guys just kind of like, we're going to do, I have a couple slides already for the IM versus SubQ. Because I heard the podcast, I heard the podcast, I'm like, I got a couple studies, and I have this monster database. When I'm writing articles and stuff, I throw. I know.
Is that how you refer to your brain? Seriously,
the monster database.
I don't. Without my computer and my phone, I don't know shit. Like I just when I get like 10 feet away, I'm out of Bluetooth range from my computer. I just turned into a zombie, basically.
Because mine's like 1 megabyte of RAM. That's it.
Oh, dude. Yeah, I've got like it's like a Timex Sinclair calculator. That's all I have left. So, but I have a PowerPoint presentation from years ago. I've given it a few times, but there's a few slides on growth hormone, and the question is like, why do some people seem to think growth hormone is the next coming, and some people are like, it's not that big of a deal. So we can go through that, and then one of the factors, the lead-up would be that one of the factors could be substantially that some people are doing SubQ and some people are doing IM, and it can make a big-ass difference. So I can go into like, what is growth hormone, how does it work, what's its role in the body, that sort of thing. I've got 3 slides. It'll take a few minutes, or we can go right to the shit that people probably want to hear about, is whether SubQ or IM is better.
Well, let's do both. But like you said, people, it's a good lead topic. So if they're clicking on this specifically to hear, which is better, IM or SubQ, let's deliver on that first, and then let's get into the other stuff, which is also fascinating.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
Careful.
I know, right?
Yeah, be careful.
That's the one. I'll just share that. Okay.
I just have a hard and fast rule: never sharing my screen. No.
Yeah. All right. So I can't see you guys at all now. So you guys see the growth hormone, the equalizer?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So, and I'm going to just go through this real quickly because people might get bored with this. But basically, this is the idea of what is growth hormone in the body? Where does it come from? It's released from our pituitary. The big thing we're worried about is that it stimulates lipolysis, right? People use it mainly for fat loss, but then some people find that they get some muscle growth from it. It does have an effect on protein synthesis, and it increases IGF-1. This is why people, and I'm gonna sort of shift this presentation for you guys, for your viewers, because they know, I gotta look at my IGF-1. That tells me how good my growth hormone's working. I wouldn't necessarily say that for a different audience. That comes from what's called the somatomedin hypothesis. So this is the basic idea, just so people know. Pituitary produces growth hormone. It makes its way to the liver, and then the liver produces IGF-1. So IGF-1 used to be known as somatomedin, meaning it mediates the somatotrophic effects, somatotrophin being growth hormone. So that's old school terminology, and one thing that elevate IGF-1 is more growth hormone. So that's what happens when people use high amounts of exogenous growth hormone. You can also bring this down an old school way. Ken, I know you remember this. People would go and they would diet and get their IGF-1 down, because that happens when you're dieting. That reflects overall nutrient balance. And then you go and get a blood work done and you're low on IGF-1. It's like, oh, you need growth hormone. And doctors would prescribe growth hormone for that reason. But growth hormone has other direct effects on bone, on muscle too. It actually increases IGF-1 production in muscle as well. So that's sort of the updated somatomedin hypothesis. In individuals that are already reached their full adult height, and we're not talking about people with acromegaly now, growth hormone its main use here is for fuel, so lipolysis. If you go to sleep, you're going to need to rely on fat unless you've had a giant meal, or if you go hypo, your blood sugar levels are low, you're going to need to rely on fat for fuel. So those two things stimulate growth hormone release. Exercise does it, growth hormone releasing hormone does it, ghrelin from the gut does it, MK677, we talked about that a few weeks back now on the Muscle Minds podcast. So if carbs are elevated, that will inhibit growth hormone. Somatostatin inhibits it. Glucocorticoids will moderate release. There's a difference between men and women depending on DHT, male hormone, obviously, or a male produced from testosterone versus estrogen. So that modifies the growth hormone release differences that you see in men versus women. So the thing that a lot of people don't know, there's two main isoforms of growth hormone. The one that people inject, the one that you get prescribed, or the one that you buy in the black market, is a 22 kilodalton molecular weight form of growth hormone. There's also a somewhat smaller isoform, 176 amino acids. This one also gets released, depending on exercise, for instance. So this can be 5 to 10%, maybe more. It depends on the person. Only like half to 3/4 of the growth hormone that's floating around is actually this 22 kilodalton version of the stuff that people get. So there's also active fragments. There's dimers or multiple dimers or oligodimers found in the blood that can have active growth hormone activity. So it's not just the one growth hormone molecule that gets injected. There's actually a whole sort of family of growth hormone molecules. Let me get this out of the way so I can see. I can't see my move. There you go. I can see what I'm reading there. So anyway, there's growth hormones found in various forms, and there's also a growth hormone binding protein that actually comes from the same gene that is responsible for the growth hormone receptor. So there's a chance of variability there. So looking at this big picture, as far as what growth hormone does, let's say it comes in exogenously, there's going to be variability in responsiveness to the IGF-1 release. Some people get a lot of IGF when they use X amount of growth hormone. Some people don't. That's going to depend on what their dietary status is. If someone's in an off season, they're eating a lot, their IGF-1 may already be elevated, or could already be a ceiling effect there. They don't get much. Depends on how much growth hormone they use. Someone starts growth hormone and they start dieting down at the same time. They give it some time for the IGF-1 levels to go up. Maybe it doesn't go up so much because now they're in a caloric deficit, which would lower it. Growth hormone brings it back up. They don't see much of a change. They're like, oh, my growth hormone's fake, right? Then the extent to which growth hormone is bound to this binding protein can make a difference. And there's also differences in the growth hormone receptor, which is in this next slide. So there's polymorphisms here. I'm not going to go into all this. To be honest, it's not that important, really. There's some interesting stuff that the growth hormone gene does not seem to affect height, for instance, in non-dwarfs. So it doesn't matter as far as growth per se, but there are differences there that matter when someone's got excess growth hormones, acromegaly. So that's another thing that could play a role. There's two versions of this growth hormone binding protein, and they have different affinity for the 20 versus 20 kilodalton growth hormone. The interesting thing here, this is on I think on the previous slide, is some people, and I don't think I mentioned this when we talked about MK677, but when you're using a ghrelin, you're using a growth hormone secretagogue peptide. The growth hormone that comes out of the pituitary then is endogenously produced. It's pharmacologically stimulated, but it's produced by the body. Yeah. And that means you can get, and I haven't seen this studied for squat, but you can get different versions of these growth hormones. And if you're someone who, for instance, has a growth hormone receptor isoform that's has a higher affinity or more sensitive to one or the other of these growth hormone isoforms, and you get one or more of the other from using a growth hormone secretagogue peptide, or MK67 is not a peptide, you could have a scenario where someone lucks out, they get more of one of the isoforms and they have the right receptor, and those secretagogues work splendidly for them, which happens sometimes. Not to mention the other stuff we talked about with MK67, just as one example. So this is some reasons why the secretagogues as well as exogenous growth hormone could make a difference. There's also growth hormone antibody formation. It happens between like 0 and 60% of the time, depending on the growth hormone in the studies with dwarfs. So here is the table. Children with detectable growth hormone, up to 2 years of therapy at this dosage, and using these forms of growth hormone. For instance, Humatrope didn't work out so well. 10 out of 46 of the kids did. Using Novo Nordisk, none. So this would be a 40 to 60 IUs per week for a 100 kilogram bodybuilder. So there's some differences depending on the immunogenicity, so to speak, to what degree antibodies will form from the different forms of growth hormone. It's highly variable. Interestingly enough, it doesn't seem to affect growth of dwarfs. So some dwarfs who have formed the antibodies think, okay, that's not good. Antibodies bind up the growth hormone. The growth hormone can't do its trick. Those dwarfs wouldn't grow as well when they get the exogenous growth hormone. It has in the studies that I've seen. This slide's a little bit old, so maybe there's some newer stuff that I haven't seen, but it doesn't seem to matter. Does it matter to bodybuilders? I don't know. That's why I put importance there in the lower left. So then there's the other issue of quantity and quality in black market products. And Ken, I know you guys have talked about this here with GH as far as pharmaceutical grade and that sort of thing. But
Skip is sponsored by Serostim now.
I knew he had stopped. I knew
that
he
would be
had
nice.
stopped. Yeah, so you can underdose growth hormone. You probably remember back in the day that they would put HCG in because it looked like growth hormone.
Sure.
Oh yeah.
That was they could go and get the pregnancy test at Walgreens. Like, fuck, I got bad stuff.
I got scammed.
Yeah, you got scammed. Or people would put CGC 1295 with DAC in there, and they get some growth hormone elevation from that. And that would be cheaper than growth hormone itself. So with the quality can be an issue. You can have incomplete proteins or poor conformation when these are made with recombinant DNA, and there can be storage and production issues. So counterfeits, there can be oxidation, particularly at the methionine amino acid, or deamidation cleavage. So you end up with fragments, and you have the growth hormone molecules that potentially aren't effective. They just don't bind to the growth hormone receptor. If they do, they don't activate it very well. And then you can interaction factors. So things I've already mentioned here, growth hormone, isoform sensitivity, antibodies, blah, blah, blah. So this shows subcutaneous 9 IUs of growth hormone. This is a time course. So somewhere, I think this is maybe in male and female in these two, but I'm not sure. So somewhere around the 3-hour mark is when you're getting a peak here.
Okay.
This is why people will go and they'll inject 9 or 10 IUs, a whole bottle, and they go in and get a growth hormone test about this time, and they go and they compare with some of the online sources to see where does my growth hormone stack up.
Yeah.
The issue could be there, potentially binding, or what we're going to talk about in the next 2 slides. So I think I need to stop my screen sharing and go to the other slideshow. So hold on, let me do that.
Guys, I got to take a break to do the whole like, share, subscribe thing, but I also want to say thank you to you. The internet's kind of a weird place, in case you didn't know, and I'm glad that we've put the community together that we have. I'm grateful to read your comments. In fact, I know a lot of YouTubers that don't read comments. I read all of them, and I try to get back to everybody. So if you comment, I will see it, and I'll try to get back to you. Also, the like button is absolutely free of charge. You don't have to pay anything to hit it, and it does help us out a ton. It's not going to like push us into your algorithm, but it will help other people to hopefully find the show. So if you like our stuff, please try to help us out.
So this is what made me think about, I knew I had these papers when you guys brought this up on the other podcast. So I'm like, there's a couple studies. I figured I'd take a look at those things. So one thing I thought I'd mention, it's kind of important. When you see graphs like this and you see these bars here, so like there is a dot, that's a mean bar, and this is a plus standard deviation bar. So they drew them in one direction just to make the graph less messy. But what this means is that for this time point, 2 hours afterwards, this was the average, right? It peaked about 3 hours, so this was the average here. And then, for instance, for this peak, this is the standard deviation. So that means if we look over here, this is the normal curve, the Gaussian distribution, the bell curve basically, and it shows what a standard deviation is. So if this was our average, so this value here on the curve, and we went out one standard deviation either way, that would capture a little more than 2/3 of the people. If we're assuming we got this normal distribution, that's a pretty safe assumption. So if we want to make sure we're missing only maybe 5% of people, we go out 2 standard deviations. So I'm going to draw a bottom line here. So if 2/3 of people here, if this is like, let's say this is 37 and this goes up to like 50, so that's like 13, and we go down here and we go down to like 24. So if we go from 24 to, what did I say, like 50, that captures 2/3 of the people, a little more than 2/3 of the people in terms of their peak dose. So there's going to be some people that are up here potentially, a very few. Our bulk of our folks are going to be here, right? And there'll be people down here, assuming this is normally distributed at this time point. So these are big standard deviation markers here. So there's going to be some super responder, at least in terms of what happens to serum growth hormone concentration, who's going to be up here after this dose. And there's going to be some poor sod down here as well, potentially, if you test in other people. And for what it's worth, we're just diving into this. This is about 9 IUs for a 100 kilogram person. It's usually how I standardize things. So this is like the 10 IU bottle. And what you see here is huge variation. And we're just looking at this one dotted curve. So that's another potential source. There's just a lot of variety. There's a lot of variation in terms of the binding of these things. Degradation too could be a possibility. I don't know about the degradation and muscle being a possibility. I haven't seen that, but it's, it could possibly happen. But the main point here is that there's 3 conditions in this graph. The dotted line with the open squares is IM, and this is 4 IUs. There's just a different concentration. So they compared a more concentrated injectate, so they had more volume, but it's every time they gave about 9 IUs. This is 10 IUs per ml. It's just less concentrated. So we can just kind of ignore that. This is SubQ, everything being the same, 9 IUs total. And here is the SubQ value, this solid line. So this peaks out at about 15, 16 maybe on average. That's SubQ. This peaks at like 37 or so for IM. That's a monstrous difference. It's like twice as much or more on average. All right. So if you look at area under the curve, which is a good way to see what is the exposure from the drug, how much is it going to affect your body? Obviously, if we filled in the area under this curve and figured out what that is, I think it's going to be smaller. It does come down more rapidly here. And I could go and look at this paper, but we definitely get a higher peak. So there's a difference there in the pharmacokinetics. Big one. And this is this paper from 92. And then here's another paper. And this is a cool one because they compared men and women. These were actually trained subjects. These were athletes. So they were all trained. So this is pretty relevant to people listening now. These weren't bodybuilders, but they're bodybuilders like, you're giving me GH? Yeah, I'm coming in. They would sign up for sure. It's the same thing about 10 IUs for 100 kilogram person, men versus women. And here's the subcutaneous scenario. And in this case, some people got up to like 30. Each of these little lines, in this case, is a different person. So there's no standard deviation bars in this because each of these plots is a different subject. And the thick plot is the average. It got up to like, it was close to 15 again. I'll go back a slide. Just about 15 here, right?
Okay.
So 9 IUs, this is 10 IUs, just about the same. And here's the IM version. The line is the average. We're up at like 40. We're up 37, so not far off. So that's 9 IUs got 37. 10 IUs got about 40 here. But look at this dude.
I want to be that guy. I want to be that guy.
Everyone wants to be that guy, right? And then there's this poor guy. And this person had delayed peak, it looks like. If I'm reading that right.
Yeah.
So these are the men. And then things are a little bit different for the women. But here is for instance, here's a woman. And her peak was higher than, sorry, I didn't do that very well. Her peak was higher, me just eyeballing it here, than all but the guy that is the Scott McNally here, who had the giant GH spike. And then on average, though, we see less. And this is what you see with the women. This is in the other PowerPoint. I'll spare you guys the trouble of going back and looking at it. But you see a different diurnal pattern of growth hormone that's sort of more spread out with women. So it makes sense that things would be more spread out. They just manage growth hormone, not only from a secretion standpoint, from a binding standpoint and degradation standpoint. So still getting higher peaks here on IM for women. But here's this is the woman with subcutaneous, and hers was higher than these guys, or any of the guys for subcutaneous. Now, is this the same person, the super responder? I don't know. They didn't number those folks. But other people are getting, they're getting inflections. And some of this could be endogenous growth hormone.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I see all those little, especially in the women's side, the females, they have all those continual little spikes along the way.
Yeah. So they buffered the elevation, right? And it looks like they brought things back down. I'm guessing, I can't really follow these plots, but these very likely are just the normal sporadic elevations, the discontinuous elevation of growth hormone that you get. So that's the nice thing about growth hormone, unlike using like a long acting test where it's going to take a while for your HPTA to recover. In this case, growth hormone is normally pulsatile like this. So you have a big pulse, and the body is used to seeing pulsatility. So, and it's in and out much more rapidly than, like testing, enthate, what have you.
Would you or could you postulate that the reason that females aren't as responsive is, as you touched on before, estrogen? And if that is the case, then couldn't it be argued that lower estrogen levels in males would be more productive while on growth hormone?
I think there's just the factor of, let me get out of this PowerPoint so I can see you guys here. so much. I got dual screens. Yeah. Let's see here.
There we go.
Yeah, I think bringing the estrogen down anyway it could help, and additionally because of that factor, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But the estrogen, having estrogen low or blocking the estrogen receptor helps with fat loss. Anyhow,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
so we kind of know that. So I don't know, to tease that out. Maybe there's some data somewhere. Like if you want to really geek out, I can kind of figure out how to tease that out in some way. But yeah, that's a good It's another
Well, it seemed
reason.
like an obvious implication.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure if there
Absolutely.
was something else where you go, no, that's
No, that's very logically well thought out. Yeah, it totally makes sense to me, for sure. So anyway, that's one of those things, and I'm like, God, man, I don't want to just like, look what I know, look what I got in my database, right? I know this thing.
Yeah.
But I just looked that stuff up. You can find it on Google Scholar. I'm like, there's got to be someone has to have done a study published on the pharmacokinetics. So it's just interesting that this is not that well known. It's interesting that everyone says we should always do IM. That was Sison and Humatrope. So it could be that there's some differences for other growth hormones depending on what's in the bottle once they've been reconstituted. But it's just a kind of an interesting factoid. So especially if you're using those two, someone would be prescribed those or what have you, then it makes sense to go IM, I would think.
I can't remember
pretty
looking
obvious.
at the labels on the stuff, because who reads the labels? Their pharmaceutical GH.
Yeah.
I can't remember. What do they tell patients to inject? Do they say SubQ or IM?
The package inserts.
Yeah.
I want to.
I believe it's SubQ.
Yeah, I thought
That's where I was going with that, because for some reason I recall reading the Serostim, the whole fold out, which is like it opens up to a page like that, saying SubQ. Now, based on those studies, which, like you said, you just pointed out, they've been around since '92. Why haven't they updated their packaging, or why haven't they updated their prescribing information? What'd you think? I know you don't know, but like, what would you think?
I mean, there's just strange stuff like and I'm going to get this wrong, but there's a rule that the FDA it's involved with the FDA and the CDC, I believe, too, that when you have any drug that's been opened, it has to be disposed of in 30 days. So you buy like a multi-use test vial, right? And you get prescribed 1 ml per week, and like you just throw away the other 6 mils that you didn't use after a month.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
We don't.
No, of course, and doctors, wouldn't. But that's been a problem for some doctors. So I suspect that if it's tested with a SubQ, then it's meant for SubQ administration, and then there's no way around that unless they go through all the testing and they pay the money.
Okay.
And they don't want to do that.
It's only prescribed for this particular mode of method of application. So,
Method of administration, route of administration.
route of administration, yeah.
Yeah.
On that note, also talking about peptide hormones and maintaining their stability. Just for shits and giggles, one time I noticed I had like an old bottle of melanotan, and these guys know, that was sitting in the back of the fridge for like 2 years, and I was like,
Reconstituted, right?
No, it was already constituted.
Yeah, so
reconstituted.
So it was sitting there constituted.
Yeah.
2 years at least, and I'm like, let's just see. So I took like maybe 500 micrograms of it, and within 3 or 4 minutes, I got the extreme nausea and flushing. And so it made me. I think when I realized that, I'm like, everything they've said about prescribing and about GH insulin and throw it away is complete garbage at this point, in my opinion. Because I've also noticed with insulin too that I've used insulin that was, I don't know, I probably opened it and used it for a month, and then I went back and put it away, and then used it again out of the fridge maybe 4 months later.
Oh yeah,
it was probably just as potent as it was, because I had the same effect on blood sugar that I had when I first took it.
Yeah.
Some insulin package inserts suggest you can just leave it at room temperature.
I've seen that too.
I've seen that too.
Diabetics all do that. They always just carry it around at room temperature, and I would be the idiot 15, 20 years ago when I'd be personal training these people, be like, that really needs to be in the fridge.
Right.
As we understand, peptides need to be, somewhere around 40 degrees to maintain their potency.
Right. I think some drugs, they may break down differently, and like you throw some stuff, if something's in solution and you put it in the freezer, which might be okay for a powder, then you can get a freeze fracture basically, and then the protein gets degraded, and then it's like, I'll just make it extra cold so it'll degrade more slowly. It's like, no, you just broke it.
Yeah.
You just done broke it.
You just rendered that $700 kit worthless.
Yeah.
Do
So-
we know if this directly transfers to IGF spikes and increases as well? Would be cool if they had IGF graphs too in the IGF binding proteins.
Yeah, those were just acute studies, like one time, and it takes days for IGF-1 to respond. It'll be a much slower elevation. So they would have to have taken, you'd have to have a rationale for doing that study. They probably wouldn't have done it with healthy subjects like this. They probably would have taken some population where elevation of IGF-1 is supposed to have some medicinal action, and then they would have treated them, and then they would have to follow them. So, with dwarfs, I would have loved to see it with dwarfs. I've looked and looked. Maybe there's something out there that I've missed. That's the thing. Like, if you look and look and look and look and look, eventually you can find all sorts of shit. And I find stuff, and it's like the 15th time I look for something, and I find something else new.
You and Dante find all the studies.
Yeah, it's just you keep digging. There's so much. Like almost everything's been done, or there's like kind of a half answer that'll give you some idea. But yeah, IGF-1, I would expect that. Yeah, but I don't know that's been done.
Do you remember, Scott, last year, year before I called you, because I just wanted to get your opinion on, remember I had a kid, 10 units of GH a day, and his IGF on testing came back at 821. And we were both like,
Yeah,
does he have cancer? Is he sick, And obviously the answer is pull the GH out and, retest again in 4 to 6 weeks and let's see where he's at. And of course, he went right back down to like 227 or something very normal and kind of solved that up real quick. Now, I guess where I'm going with the question, based off, laying that little platform, would we consider him like a GH responder?
As far as IGF-1, absolutely. He could have been like that guy, very much so, totally.
Yeah.
Where he's getting like twice the peak. The area under curve is larger, and then on top, see, that's kind of the idea. If you imagine, this is what happens with at least the majority of the factors for like the best IFBB pros, right? They may have they've got various genes in place for muscle growth, right? They've got 3 or 4 of the important ones we may don't know about. Then they've got there's a phosphodiesterase in the liver that determines how much bioavailability you get from an esterified testosterone or nandrolone or whatever. So you get more drug per milligram of what you inject. And then you have particular androgen receptor that's more sensitive, right? And so you take one guy and you put him on 400 or whatever, and he blows up like the other guy would have on 1200. But that 400 is actually like 600, and because his androgen receptor is 50% more responsive, then it becomes 900. Now he's pretty close to 1200, and then he just grows muscle better, and he just is just so much better. So you take a multitude of those factors and start overlapping them, and you get synergy, and then you get this, this person who's just got all the right genetics.
And to take it a different direction,
Yeah.
for people that are poor responders to androgens, and they take 500 milligrams of something, but really it's more like 200 milligrams in a sense, using that kind of scenario that you just painted.
Yeah, I mean, there's one study, and there was if you had one particular isoform of this this enzyme in the liver, there was like a 60% greater area under the curve for a 200 milligram. I think it was a tescipinate injection. Right, so 200 milligrams becomes equivalent, if you have the right gene, to 320, right? Now, maybe there's another gene that I don't know about, but this is the enzyme I think that is the main one responsible for that cleaving of like an enin theta away from test. But so maybe you got the regular version of that. But then you have an androgen receptor that is on the low end, because there's 2 different areas in the androgen receptor, for instance. One in particular that they found, for instance, you have an elevated risk for prostate cancer, and androgen sensitivity. That's how they kind of figured this stuff out. But if you, for instance, got the short end of the stick, then you don't have the good enzyme in the liver for getting more out of your injectable, and then you have poor sensitivity, right? And there are enzymes in muscle too that break down androgens, so that's a possibility as well. So you align all those things up, and you could just, you could really be pretty bad off as far as making gains, or you could be really well off, right? I mean, look at like a simple one. Sorry, one thing, it's like kids who get gyno, You know, some boys get gyno and it's really bad. They're not doing anything. That's just variability without any pharmacological intervention. And then some people they're not even close to being a problem, right? So anyway, Ken, what were you gonna say?
Well, it just seems clear, and correct me if I'm, not understanding this correctly, but it seems clear that we can't take, in this particular case, say the IGF levels and go, oh, his progress is going to be so much better because he has a higher IGF level. There are so many variables, and I posited this before, but I can't explain it because my brain isn't very big, that it's not directly related to that because there are so many other variables. Like you're saying, a portion of that IGF is not going to be usable. There are other receptor issues. I think, and this is what I touched on, and this has been a few months, but we only know this much. We're learning these things from a scientific standpoint, relatively quickly. But I want to fast forward 10 years, and I want to see more of an understanding of how, and this goes back to the pharmaceutical versus generic, how the IGF levels are so big, and this means I'm growing. That is, to me, way too black and white. Or Scott's guy who had 800 levels. How was he progressing? Was he progressing like he had 800 IGF levels, or was he just progressing like anybody else would?
No, he was.
Andrew's guy.
Okay, fair enough.
No,
but that's what I'm. But that's what I'm saying. I don't.
Like
so I'm asking: is it always directly related? Obviously, I would assume that the majority of the time it may be, but then there are other times where you have. I want to see IGF levels of all the pros. I want to see if Keone or Keone, how do you say his name?
Keone.
If does he have is his IGF levels off the chart, or does he have an average?
His Italian
or
cousin is
average?
Keone. That's it.
Yeah. And I'm usually pretty good with names, but I wasn't sure on that one. But the point is, I'd like to see that, just to see if across the board, if those IGF levels are extremely elevated, that all those people are crazy responders from a progress standpoint, not just from the IGF levels being higher, but from the actual progress.
So I could probably go and find. I can't give any numbers now, but there's various lines of evidence looking at IGF-1 and, for instance, nitrogen balance in like growing animals, or if like burn victims. So you remember Scott Connolly and metrics.
Oh, yeah.
And all the metrics. So a lot of stuff he used to talk about was metrics was somehow formulated in creating positive nitrogen balance, or preventing the loss of muscle and nitrogen from protein in burn victims, which is a highly catabolic scenario. And so I was sort of laugh because I never saw those data, but he always talked about that. So there's for instance data on burn victims where when IGF-1 goes down, nitrogen balance goes down. When IGF-1 is up, nitrogen balance is up. So growing animals have a high nitrogen balance. They're accumulating protein because more nitrogen is being stored. Nitrogen is like 16% of protein on average. That's what the nitrogen balance thing is about. It's not, there's holes in the nitrogen balance. Like you can have positive nitrogen balance and not see actual measurable changes in body composition. I've seen that. There's a study out of Canada, for instance, that long ago they showed that. It's like that nitrogen balance was really awesome with the high protein, but the muscle growth didn't happen. Still, though, in general, you can see there's a correlation between those. They tend to happen in parallel. If you got this scenario with a bodybuilder, let's say you take two guys, and somehow you had, just hypothetically, everything else was the same, and one guy, and they're both eating in the same amount. You presume it's a caloric excess, as far as you can tell. You've equalized all the variables, but one guy has IGF-1 that's twice the other guy. You're going to expect that his nitrogen balance is going to be better there too. So like you could look at a correlation, and I don't know how strong it is, between nitrogen balance, for instance, in growing animals where they're gaining muscle, they're getting bigger, and IGF-1. And if that, you could see behind that correlation, let's say the correlation is 0.8, which is really, really high. Like 1 would be perfect. You can double that, and 0.8 times 0.8, and you get 0.64. So it would tell you like about 64%, maybe like 2/3 of the variation in growth, the variation in nitrogen balance would be explained by IGF-1. So like if you have a really high correlation, this is what I could try to find out. Now I'm kind of curious. I'll probably do this with all my free time and see how strong those correlations are, because I think they're pretty strong. And then the scientists would say, okay, like a correlation that high when we've just got that one variable that's changing, we presume there's aren't too many other influences, no other covariates, so to speak. It tells us that IGF-1 is important. But you could have a scenario, just to play the devil's advocate here, where someone is using GH, and maybe they're like Andrew's guy, and they get lots of IGF-1 for whatever reason, but their diet is shit, and they don't like to eat protein, and they just like to eat like rice cakes all the time or whatever. They've got a great GH IGF-1 response. The somatomedin hypothesis was in that first slide is awesome. But all the other shit is way out of whack, and they're not training hard, their diet sucks, they're up late night, they don't sleep very well, blah, blah, blah. They could actually not be holding on to muscle very well at all, despite a high IGF-1.
Okay.
You wouldn't expect that, because it's seen in like so many studies that IGF-1 is associated with positive nitrogen balance, but it could be way off like that. So you could have the one guy with a high IGF-1, he's nailing it, man. His training's on point. He's got plenty of protein. He's got a good caloric excess. He's sleeping. He's doing everything perfectly. The other guy just happens to be a high growth hormone responder in terms of IGF-1, and he's totally dropping the ball. You know, he's using too many stems, blah, 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 and his diet is crap. Their IGF-1 is the same. The one guy's doing really well, and the other guy's doing shitty. Yeah. I could totally see that, too. So, yeah, it's all over it's hard to say, you know, but... That's the good scientific answer is like, it depends.
Didn't your guy test again when he was dieting and his numbers weren't as high?
They were still elevated more.
Were they?
Than mine would be. You know,
okay.
Even.
Okay.
And I also want to point out he was using generics, a very popular generic brand that everyone seems to use these days. So he wasn't using Serostim or Sizin or Nordy's. Yeah. But yeah, no. When he was dieting. He, I want to say it was still like 481 or 541, something like that, which, is still pretty elevated.
He wasn't losing muscle. He wasn't
losing, no. Yeah. Okay, so this is another thought that brought up. I think that's why a lot of guys grow during prep, is they're able to withstand the decrease in IGF-1 that comes with caloric restriction and get more out of it, get more out of what they are taking in terms of drugs, nitrogen retention, etc. So what do you think about that, Scott?
It's the interesting thing too is, so like from a muscle standpoint, and there's a whole kind of a small body of literature looking at this, but the IGF-1 that matters for muscle growth or stimulating hypertrophy is the locally produced IGF-1.
Yeah.
The stuff in the blood that you measure on blood work is basically it's a correlate of nitrogen balance. So it basically reflects the nitrogen balance, reflects the sort of anabolic catabolic ratio, to use sort of bro terms for the whole thing, to some certain degree. So if someone is in that state where they're recomping during a prep, they're actually growing some muscle and dropping fat at the same time. Simply being in that state, one of the ways in which all of that is mediated in a very global fashion is through IGF-1, right? If you could get in to take a muscle biopsy, which this is not going to happen anytime soon, right? And you compare a muscle biopsy of that guy with someone who's not doing so well in prep, you'd probably see higher IGF-1 levels. That somatomedin hypothesis, it was like 2000, the first somatomedin hypothesis like in the late 50s or late 60s. That's the revamped version where growth hormone also causes local IGF-1 release. I don't know for sure, but it's the same growth hormone receptor in the liver and in muscle. So it's possible, if all the second messengers after the growth hormone binds to the receptor and then it does its magic, that if that guy responds in terms of blood IGF-1, he may also respond in terms of local muscle IGF-1. So when he's using GH, he could be the guy where GH, although the studies don't support this magical muscle growth effect, like you see from Gear, for instance, he could be a guy where at least it's helping a lot. It's in his favor by far. So that's the thing with IGF-1. Like like if you look, and I'm trying to remember the numbers, but if you look at how much IGF-1 is produced by the liver compared to what guys who use exogenous IGF-1, it's like several times more than what most people would use, even at a high dose. But some people get really good effects. And I have a whole, you probably saw it. It came out like a year or so ago on John's site on mountaindogdiet.com. So it's a pretty complex scenario, but there's like at least 7 IGF-1 binding proteins, probably some more, right? So, is it something where those guys who inject the IGF-1 just for a small period of time, the binding proteins can't do their work and kind of regulate this excessive elevation of IGF-1, and then it has its effect, binds to the receptors, and then all the downstream effects happen before the binding proteins can kind of take care of the problem. Like relatedly, there's like something else that I wanted to look into. This a guy who, I won't say who it is, but he's someone who's got a pretty deep level of knowledge on gear, especially, and he's a IFBB pro, old school guy, and he's talked to a couple of people now who were finding that injecting insulin in the muscle, and you don't hear about this a lot, but injecting insulin will cause a local growth effect. IM insulin. And the one guy did it, he was injecting his brachioradialis just out of like his whatever, because he's putting other things other places. He does whatever, and he just started doing that. He's not like doing all this grip work. He's not an arm wrestler like that. He's a bodybuilder. And all of a sudden he noticed like his brachioradialis was just monstrous.
Really?
Right? So, yeah. So like, and I'm thinking like, okay, so what's going on here? Like, is there a local effect whereby just transiently, because insulin's water-based, you are just like saturating all the insulin receptors in that small area and causing a local anabolic effect? You don't necessarily go hypo from this, but it's because it's so localized, and then the insulin stays bound to its receptor there for a while, and you get, for who knows how many, it's just a number of hours, a highly, highly potent localized anabolic effect from insulin going in that one spot. Because most people do insulin SubQ. You can do it IM. It changed the pharmacokinetics. But this guy was getting like all this growth from the brachioradialis, because that's where he just kept on put his insulin there. Dang. So the thought with me is like, okay, so like what if you do, if you're using insulin like multiple times a day, like put it in the weak muscle group. If you're gonna do that, just know that, and this is another slide in that first presentation, that you change you make like a Humulin R more like a Humalog. If you go,
that's how I use it.
Yeah, if you go IM, it's much faster. Yeah. So in and out, which is good, but as long as you know what you're doing. Yeah, but you change the pharmacokinetics, so you need to know that. But anyway, so it's kind of a mystery as to which way. Like the IGF-1, it's like you look at it, it's like, okay, if it's up, that's good. What it's doing directly to create that, maybe it's just a global thing. Some guys use IGF-1 and they get leaner.
Yeah, I saw that. I certainly saw that.
Yeah. So, like, is that because it's creating an anabolic effect and then creating a caloric deficit and the calories are coming from the fat? It's not known to be lipolytic. It binds to the insulin receptor, and that's lipogenic, anti-lipolytic. Yeah. But if you grow and it creates a caloric need and then creates a caloric deficit, then it comes somewhere. It's not going to come out of thin air. It's going to come from body fat. So you get leaner because you're recomping, because the IGF-1 does that. Yeah. So
it's the same argument with insulin too. I'm intrigued actually by I have been putting insulin and my growth hormone in the top of my rectus femoris high, because they have been weak from my injuries in 2020. And it's funny because I've noticed as I've gotten leaner, like, man, they're pretty
huge,
pronounced in that area. Like, and you kind of look and go, man, that's so. As you're I thought, well, it's probably just localized, a little bit of inflammation because I'm always putting them there. But now I'm like,
How about them
I have to
apples?
pay attention to that.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued.
Don't put it in your dick, Ken. It's not going to work that way.
You don't know it's
I was
not
going to be the one
work.
to say that. I was going to wait for a pause, and then I was.
Damn.
He lobbed it up. Someone had to hit it out of the park.
I was just waiting for the moment.
I'm like, be right back.
I was waiting for the moment.
Ken's, next time you're looking down, it's like, I might just went up a few inches here, man. Just accidentally put it
Just a
there.
little further. Oops.
He's got a new protocol 6 times a day, 2 units of each.
No before and after pictures, please. Keep them to yourself.
I got to. This might be too big of a segue. You can say yes or no.
Okay.
But so constantly get the questions of like IGF Des, IGF LR3. In your opinion, do they work? The ones you could buy. We're not talking increlex or anything. We're talking about like the stuff you buy off the peptide sites. Have you seen any positive effects from using those products?
It's so variable, you know.
Yeah.
I don't. You're getting the same thing I'm getting. Some people
Yeah.
love it. Some people don't.
Yeah, that's the thing. Some people are like they
Yeah.
swear by it. You know.
Yeah.
And then you have to question whether they're reading and assessing the feedback correctly, or if they just feel that it's working. I want to see something.
placebo effect.
I've been around too long. I want to see that it's obvious. Like I either notice, and I go in with there can't be a placebo effect because I'm going in basically going, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of my approach. So I question people's, it's kind of like along the lines of protein powder. People, vast majority of people, their favorite protein powder is the one that tastes the best.
Yeah, right.
You know, but they'll claim that,
Team
it's
Skip.
because of this, and it's because of, exactly. Because of this, and well, it doesn't do this to me. It's like, you don't know. You're not even that good with feed. You can't even assess the feedback to your training, but you figured it out with your protein, your protein powder. Come on.
Yeah.
Good point.
You know,
What
Ken,
about-
you see almost everything like this. Like, what should I do as far as should I use pea protein? Is that the new thing, or should I use this or that and the other? And people just say, I like this, and they don't
Or
substantiate why they like
the
it.
flavor's
It's like,
really good. It's something not what's the word? Something very unique. Like it's blueberry muffin pie crumble. It's like,
Ooh, yeah.
and you got it for $1.19 a pound.
Phew.
But that's the one you respond best to.
The best protein
come
out
on
there.
now.
What
Right.
about? Can we talk a little bit about growth hormone and insulin? We also talked about that a couple of weeks ago too. I think that there's a lot of confusion as to if your goal is going to be to grow muscle, on how we would look at timing for growth hormone for growth hormone and insulin. Would it matter when we're taking each? Obviously, a lot of us are using insulin pre-workout, for instance, say, and let's say you were using a fast-acting insulin pre-workout. How would timing work with growth hormone based off of just what you've looked at in research, Scott, and what you've experienced over the years?
you guys saw those plots. There were several plots in what we just looked at in the slide. So you're getting, when you inject growth hormone, you're elevating growth hormone for 6-8 hours at least. There's variable, right? Different in women too. We saw. So it's not like those old school protocols where 18 minutes out you start with 4 IUs of GH, and then 13 minutes out you drink your special concoction with 6 different ingredients in it, and then 8 minutes out you do your insulin. It doesn't really matter that much. The main thing is you just keep yourself from going hypo. If you're going to use a peri-workout, for instance, don't kill yourself. Not that I'm suggesting anyone do it that way, but that's the main thing, is just watch out, because the insulin could kill you. Can get you can fuck you up. If it doesn't kill you directly, it could make it so that you can't drive your car and you get in a wreck and you have a worst case scenario. But the growth hormone has such a a long half-life that's not a big deal. The thing I know I've talked about this, I can't remember which podcast it was, but I've talked about it several times, is that what I think part of why some people find, and we've already covered some of this, that growth hormone helps them put on muscle mass, could be that if they're using it with insulin in particular, that's going to help because of its anabolic effects. When you're using it alongside, when you're training your ass off, you got plenty of protein in play, and the growth hormone is going to offset the fat gains that you would get. And if you can offset fat gains, you leave more of that runway, so to speak, to allow you to keep moving upward, and then you avoid that psychological break that happens where you're starting to not like how you look.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're staying leaner and you're staying extra full from the insulin, you just do more you dot the I's and cross the T's because you're digging how things are working. And the insulin or the growth hormone allows that to happen, not necessarily per se because it's being directly anabolic, although that's a possibility with the local IGF-1 release, what have you. But it just allows you to eat more and have a greater caloric excess, potentially, and have more energy available for growing in a way you wouldn't, and you're staying leaner. So it allows you to recomp in a certain sense because it has the lipolytic effect, which would otherwise be canceled just by having pharmacologically, you're causing fat burning that wouldn't typically be in place when you're eating all the calories that you're eating to grow. So it just makes the growth, it seems like it's anabolic per se, but it's allowing everything else to be more anabolic. Your diet, your behavior, the insulin that you're using too, because you're taking in more food and blah, blah, blah. All the other factors sort of synergize, and the growth hormone keeps the fat gain at bay. So
you're saying results beget more results.
Yeah, well, absolutely, yeah.
Right?
And then placebo effect on top of that,
Yeah.
too.
If you like how you're looking, you're definitely you're going to dot the I's, cross the T's, make sure all your supplements are in, you're going to stay on your cardio, your diet 100% more when things are moving the right way. Because how many of us know, whether through clients or friends, that when they're on cycle, all 6 meals are being eaten, everything's calculated, but as soon as they're cruising or they go off cycle, I got 4 meals in today, I only trained 3 times this week, and it's like, well, no shit, you're not getting the results. You're not doing all the 90% stuff. You're worried about the 10% stuff that you're not putting in your body right now.
Yeah.
I just had a thought. It would be, you could never really do this, I don't think, but imagine a study where you take one group and, maybe one group and they never get to see what they're looking like. They don't get any, there's no mirrors, they don't get to see what's going on, and they don't get any positive feedback, and no one says, hey, you're looking bigger, or you don't get any of that. And the other group, people are just, they get oogled in the gym and everyone's saying, hey, big guy, and they're getting all the positive feedback, right? That would create this massive placebo effect, and see what happens. And the one group's like, geez, I've been doing everything. I haven't gotten a single compliment. I've gotten nothing. No one's paying attention to me. Yeah. For a lot of people, they probably just stop because they're not getting all that psychological positive feedback coming in.
It's funny.
Basically, that's my wife. That's why I'm not growing, and now it's her fault.
That's why you're not a pro, Ken.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to blame her. She's the reason.
It's cool. It's funny you bring this up because I was talking to my training partner today, and she's 12 weeks out from the Tampa Pro, and she's like at that point where like all the baby fat, all that preliminary fat's off, and now we're really getting some of the detail. Abs are really showing, some glute lines and stuff, and she was like, man, I just love like everyone's telling me how I look, and everyone's like, and people walk up to her and be like, wow, like you really changed in the last week, and you could really see, because I've been removed from contest prep, all of us have for a while now. Well, Skip's in it, so he's probably experiencing it.
Yeah, I'm
but
not
the
there
praise
yet.
and the affirmations like go a long way to making you go harder, go stronger, do more, and affect your mood during prep, right? So I think this is like obviously it's not a real case study, but it's definitely like a anecdotal report of, because and you guys have all been to, or at least Scott, you've been to MI40.
Yeah.
How it's a bodybuilder gym. Someone's always in prep. People are always giving praise to whoever's in prep, and they're watching them pose, and it's cool. It's a community, right? And you really see it because people that are getting that, they do have better preps. They're excited to go to the gym. They're kind of like forgetting that prep fog is in there. They're not dragging their feet as much. They're excited. Yeah, it definitely. And I was telling her today, I'm like, yeah, man, I remember, I forget that boost, and I wish I still had it. Like I wish people were coming up to me being like, hey, you look pretty big today. Like, man, you're getting tight. So I hope you're getting that, Skip.
Yeah, and it is nice. You can be having a day where you're kind of in your head. Someone you don't know, maybe they're not even big. Someone says something, and I always say the same shit that I have said for 20 some years. It'll never get old. I always appreciate someone, any compliment. And like I said, it's probably because I don't get any from my wife ever. I say I could walk around ripped to shreds, naked with a carrot in my ass in front of the TV, and she'd be like, "You're in the way." like she just doesn't know. And I don't mean that bad. I'm just saying it's just she's so used to it that it's borderline apathetic. It's like, you're not going to impress me. I've seen it time and time again for 33 years.
Yeah. Was that also why the good pros continue to just get better and better? because they're constantly, whether off season, content, they're getting affirmations.
I think it's why they go through girlfriends so quickly. I mean, I'm just saying.
There could be something there.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun. I do know one person that someone you asked about IGF-1 LR3, etc. I do know one person that I talked with. Not too long. He's a high level pro, and he was asking about IGF-1, and he has been. I'm not sure. I haven't talked to him for a while, but I can get a hold of him and find out if how much he thinks his progress, because his progress has been really, really good, came from using increlex, basically.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah, the real deal. So,
But
The
can
good
we
stuff.
even consider increlex IGF? I mean, it's like two different animals, right?
yeah.
Talking about
You
increlex
know.
versus the IGF LR3 and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking different stratosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
costs, $100 a unit. The
Yeah.
other costs, $4.
I'm not a big fan of IGF, but
Right.
I'll take increlex if you get it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I may be just getting the answer we already know, but
Yeah.
Did you ever get to use increlex, Scott? No.
no, I mean
I've talked to people who have,
Yeah,
I've talked
I
to
know
people. If we know somebody who did, Scott, but they didn't really have a lot of it, so it was hard to tell at that time
I know
how
a few
that
people
went.
who
Yeah.
had, who had
Yeah, I know a
gains.
couple people in common with you that you.
Yeah.
In fact, you may even been mentioning him earlier in another context of another anonymous pro. So I shall
Yeah.
say no
Have
more.
any of those people you're talking about taken it and felt they did not respond well to? Because I'll tell you this, if I spend that much money on it, I'm going to convince myself that I'm responding
yeah.
very well to it.
I know one guy who did, and he was not. I have to go look at our message, but he wasn't terribly impressed by it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you say the same
I
way
remember-
that some guys that jump on GH, or like say they start using a farm grade GH, and they're like, yeah, I got something, but I'm not that impressed by it. Would you say kind of similar to that? Like they did get some results, but not the big jump they thought they were going to get out of
Yeah,
it.
he didn't. I think that's where he was basically.
Yeah.
But he had already maxed out a lot of other stuff. He was doing everything. He's like he just wanted it, and he didn't have the. I mean, there's probably genetic propensity, like pretty much with everything, that IGF-1 is gonna create another leap forward for you.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I mean, this person, if I remember, it's been a while. This has been like 5 years ago or more, but he was already eating. So he was pushing so many other things. So gear will increase IGF-1, food will increase IGF-1. And then you may be that you've capped out on your particular IGF-1 ceiling, so to speak, and you add more. It's like you can't put more gas in the tank; it just spills out, right? There's nothing left for it to do.
Yeah.
So, but you take someone else who's got some room in terms of IGF-1, then that person's going to respond. If he'd done it earlier in his career, he might have gotten something out of it. But at this point, this guy was over 300 pounds. And pulled every lever he possibly could. And you get, like I said, IGF-1 goes along with growing and positive nitrogen balance, all sorts of things. So that lever is kind of getting pulled along the way. And then if you try to add more in, you can't pull the lever down anymore if it's already all the way down, so to speak.
Can I piggyback off that real quick?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. I get trolled, and someone wants to bust my ass every now and then about me flexing about using, Serostim, and you suck for as much Serostim as you're using. I just want to point this out because this goes along with what you're saying, Scott. I'm 55 years old. I've been doing this shit for 41 years. I have said more times than I could possibly even try to count that I am mediocre at best. And because I'm trying to kind of cross the finish line in this sport, so to speak, I want to pull all the levers, and I want to leave nothing on the table. So if I'm spending a lot of money on Serostim, that someone else would be like, oh, that's crazy. You're not that good. You suck. The reason is just because when it's all said and done, and the finish line is closer than it is for some clown who's trolling me at 30 years old and quite frankly doesn't have a very good physique himself or themselves, it's kind of an odd, thing when you trash somebody and you're not all that good. But anyway, that's why. So before anybody, if they're listening, you're getting ready to troll fuck out of me. I don't care. I'm not going to leave anything on the table, and I want to make sure that the GH, maybe I'm not responding any better. I think I am, because I wouldn't spend that money if I didn't think that I was benefiting from it. But I can at least do that and know that I've pulled all the levers when it's all said and done. So I'd say eat a bag of dicks, but that's probably not politically correct. But that's why I do the things so that there's kind of no stone left unturned. And at the end of the day, I can say, you know what? I tried to do everything I could, and I still sucked. Or okay, I got a little, I did get a little better, and it's something that I was willing to do. I wanted to piggyback because it's just every now and then someone's got to jump in there, and they have to, remind you that you're just not very good. Yeah.
If you were to see the people who's like you said, it's they're usually not better than you. They're usually it's rare that somebody who's like when's the last time you had like good pro that comes on and starts talking crap to somebody else that's trying to bodybuild? It's always somebody that's not
actually,
as well.
Bob Chicarillo.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
But
there are exceptions to the rule.
I think he's a different animal. I think he's just kind of jealous of all the guys that compete today and how they look.
Exception to the rule, but in general, I think if we were to see those people, the people who were like, "Skip, you suck," you probably wouldn't even give them the time of day.
Well, they wouldn't say shit to him either. That's the thing. They wouldn't
in
have the
person.
balls to say
Right, but still, I mean, it's just one of those things. I understand the lack of security. I understand why. I get it. I totally get that. But it's still. It's still, I don't want to say it hurts. It doesn't hurt, but it's enough to sting to go, God damn. Like, would you not, if you had the means and the ability, would you not do what I'm doing?
Oh, maybe it's jealousy.
Try
to
put your 30-year-old self in my position at 55 and wanting to make sure, I got a few healthy, and when I say healthy, physically healthy, like knees and back and everything.
Yeah.
I'm just doing what I'm doing. Fuck, man. Leave me alone. I'm trying to do it the best I can, like anybody else is doing.
Yeah.
A couple thoughts on one. The empty can rattles the most.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is like it's a common thing. People do this, and sometimes the things you say about others oftentimes speak more about yourself.
True.
And it's an interesting thing. This happens online, it's just a phenomenon. But the way I sort of see that, stepping back a ways, is this person is framing your life choices through his perspective and things that he wouldn't do. And when you sort of take that idea and look at it from other angles, it's like, so someone could say to me, it's like, dude, why do you spend so much money and time on your dogs? It's just a waste. They're just dogs. They're just like whatever. What are you doing with that? Or like, it's like, why do you have like, you have a $80,000 car? You don't need an $80,000. Why are you driving that car around? Or like
play that game about anything.
You have this. Like you can go to the grocery store and get fresh fruits and vegetables. Why do you have your own garden? Like, what a waste of time. Like you could go down the line about how people live their life, and for you, bodybuilding is your life in a certain sense. It's what you've done. It's what you love to do. It's what you want to do. And if you want to, like some people want to go and they buy a Lamborghini and they're going to ride that thing, it's like, do you need a Lamborghini to get to the grocery store or in a faster? You don't. It's because you want the friggin' Lamborghini. Do you need to do all these things? No. Is there a practical utility for someone else? Is that their taste? No. But it's what you want to do. And it's unfortunate because what I see from that sometimes, it's an online thing, but with that is sort of a lack of empathy to say, you know what, this is someone who lives differently than me, and I need to criticize them instead of sit back and say, why would he? This guy just has a passion for bodybuilding, and he wants to pull every friggin' lever he can. And this is what he does. And if you see someone else, like say he's a rock climber, people could say this like, oh, it's so dangerous, right? You're gonna fall and break your ass. But you see that guy who like he wants to climb every freaking mountain. And he trains his ass off and trains his fingers, and he maybe reduces his body weight so he's lighter. He goes all friggin' in. That person might say, that's the baddest friggin' thing I've ever seen. This guy's an absolute animal. And he look at you doing the same thing in your domain and think, what are you doing? Like, you look like shit. It's like, hold on. Doesn't make sense,
I feel like though people that are really into a skill or a lifestyle, when they see someone else that's in like let's say a really good like violinist or something like that,
right?
Maybe it's not my thing, which it kind of is. I really enjoy watching people that are really good at music, but like I could never do that, but I have a massive appreciation for the amount of time it must have taken to develop that skill. And I think, like, what I'm saying is, I think people maybe in that realm, whether it's musicians or rock climbers or whatever we're talking about, can see, like, okay, that person's obviously dedicated a lot of their time and energy to research, learn, train, eat, whatever it takes to build that physique. And I think they develop an appreciation too. And it's always people that don't really have something that they're grounded in that like to throw these things out.
They can't empathize. They just
bingo. That's what I'm saying. The empathy of realizing how much time and energy it takes to be proficient and good at something.
And maybe they could a little bit more if it was in
resentment.
real person, like if we were in person.
Yeah.
Maybe
No
then
one
they'd
said
be a
that.
little bit able to connect if it was not just this kind of, we're not real people, we're figures on the computer, you know what I mean, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's easy to poke fun at people in that situation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Hey, I thought of one other thing I just wanted to mention. I don't know if I ever told you this, Scott, but before I knew the inside of bodybuilding, I remembered hearing John Meadows talk on a podcast. And up until this point, most of my education had been in bodybuilding from people I knew or message boards. And if you go to the gear message boards, the source boards, they're going to promote a lot. The guys that really post a lot on those boards, a lot of times are the guys who run the biggest cycles, And I really had it in my head that you needed IGF. Everybody, all the pros, there's something there. I was at that point still. There's things that they're doing that I'm not doing.
Secrets of the
And I
pros.
remember hearing John on a podcast. It was a moment that woke me up. He said, yeah, IGF, no, I never took that stuff. And I was like, whoa, never took that stuff. I assumed he must have taken a lot to get the size he was at that time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's to some degree, it's just the opposite. It's the guys who become the best pros are the guys that just like, you did what? Really? Not that they don't end up maybe using lots of stuff, but I know many people that's like, you basically weren't even on a cycle. That was the stupidest thing ever, and you still were, almost got your pro card at a national level show. It's like if you started doing things right. So it's the ones that have really good. Not that John didn't work his ass off,
right?
But you have this perception. It's like the bigger they are, the more stuff they have to use, and that's one feature of it. But the bigger they are, the more responsive they are, and the better they probably did, and probably look better than the average person, way better with almost nothing. And that's the part that isn't immediately obvious. And it's like, do you need IGF-1 to look like John did? No.
Nope.
Yeah, apparently not.
Well, I think that's why back in the boards, the board battle days, that people struggled with Phil Heath not using what everybody else was using. They just were not going to accept that, and they were never going to believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That whole talk that I do, why you don't look like a pro. It's all about all the variability. It's like people don't want. It's just a hard pill to swallow. Yeah. To see all that. We saw that with today, like all those GH graphs. Same thing. That's why I put the standard deviation. That's the little sidebar on standard deviation. You see that with everything. Basically, that it's a basis of one statistical way of doing statistics in the biological sciences is that we have a normal curve and there's huge variability. And so Phil Heath's at one end of the spectrum. That's just all there is to it, right? No matter how hard you train, you're not going to be as fast as Usain Bolt. It doesn't matter how much stuff you use or whatever. He's just better genetically as a sprinter. So
well, we appreciate you hanging with us.
End of the spectrum.
Yeah, no kidding. We appreciate you hanging with us, Scott. We appreciate you coming on, man. Guys, of course, go to byobbcoach.com. You can get Scott's book there. And I'll post the link in the description here because you can buy the hardcover. You get the hardcover of Scott's book autographed by Scott. We'll put that link down below. And a portion of that money goes to the ASPCA to help with animals. Of course, go to bodyberry.com to reach out to Andrew. Teamskip.com to reach out to Skip. Go to McNallyDiets@gmail.com if you want to email me about coaching. And of course, TrueNutrition.com. Get your Team Skip over there with code THINK and SupplementSource.ca for Canadians. Thank you guys for Patreon. Scott, can we do a quick bonus question?
Okay.
We had that question that was for you, and I didn't think it was going to be.
And then he's like,
I
but
know.
wait, there's more. As long as I get some Ginsu knives with this question, then I'll
all right. Lipodemia. Remember that? Chris's wife. He says, question from Muscle Minds. And honestly, it's probably not the kind of question that's going to be like, oh, everybody's going to want to tune in for this. But there may be some people out there that could benefit from it.
A lot of coaches that have that one client that has
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
You know, so, yeah.
It says, my wife has
lipodema.
lipodema.
Go ahead.
Stores a disproportionate amount of fat in her thighs and bum. This fat does not come off like regular fat and has some quite uncomfortable hard nodules that cause her pain. She gets very lean overall. Her body, full abs, capped delts, very detailed back, but the legs do not change much due to this condition. Do you have any experience with clients with this condition, and are there any medications that might help? Considering a low dose of GH, happy to provide pics and more details to help. She is a savage trainer, incredibly meticulous with her diet. Cheers.
So I looked into that a little bit because you sent that to me before we started recording, and I looked at it. I never forget. There's a woman who competed in the shows in Arizona I did years ago, who was shredded in her upper body, and her lower body looked like it belonged to somebody else. It was really just kind of crazy. And I always feel kind of bad for her because you could tell she suffered. Man, she went hard. So another term for lipoedema, there are two ways. Is also lipalgia. So pain due to fat. Algia means pain, like fibromyalgia, for instance. So there's pain that's involved, as he noted in that. And one thing I found, and this is just like this was an example of me getting into Google Scholar and looking around, and it wasn't a deep dive at all. I just like skimmed the surface, but it looks like. And I would have to ask, this is where an intake with someone, a doctor in this case, would be important. But it looks like some of this can be brought on through estrogen, and she may have noticed this when she went through puberty, potentially. And if it is an estrogen-related phenomenon, which a couple papers seem to be insinuating, again, I didn't read them, and there's a genetic factor here too. Like 60 to 80% of people have a family history of this, of women. So there might be an estrogen-related strategy that he could talk with his doctor about, maybe trying a SERM as in an off-label use to try to block the estrogen receptor, and see if that's helpful. Because she has, aside from bodybuilding, it sounds like she has a need just because it hurts.
Yeah.
She has these painful fatty nodules on her legs. Like that needs to go if you can take care of that. So. If someone came to me like doing a consultation like that, I would look into that and dig into that, look at that idea. I can't prescribe anything, of course, but that's the thing that we talked before about estrogen and fat. That's the thing that seems like it's related to this. And as a thought, without knowing what he would say, but if this is something she didn't have as a child, presume she doesn't, and then she noticed because body composition in boys and girls is pretty similar up until puberty, and then things go very different directions. So if she noticed when she gained body fat during puberty, and that's when that happened, it's probably estrogen would be implicated, or maybe estrogen turned on those genes. It may be that blocking the estrogen receptor won't do diddly. There may be a study out there that I haven't seen where they've done that and treated it in that way. Or maybe she'll find a doctor who'll say, hey, we can give it a go. I don't know how old she is. She may not even. It would be crazy to see that she does everything she can, and then she becomes postmenopausal, and then it goes away, right? It's like, oh shit, right. I could have just blocked estrogen, or it gets much better. So that would be my first thought, but that's just because I had like 10 minutes to look.
I've also seen some stuff about estrogen dominance in particular, so high estrogen and very low progesterone levels. So I think along with what you're saying, Scott, maybe a SERM of some sort, but then also checking progesterone levels regularly and maybe progesterone therapy. Could help out. Yeah. Now it's also depending on her age. It might be one of those things where, the cake is cake, or the cake is baked, and you know what I mean. But if it were attacked like in her 20s, like Scott was saying, because you don't really see it in teenagers until they go through puberty, right? And then what I see typically is like when women start to gain a little bit more weight, maybe to go through their college years and beyond. Because I'm thinking back to 2 clients I had in personal training 20 years ago, and that's when it really kind of set on. And I'm wondering if maybe, knowing what I know now, if I would have said, hey, let's do labs, because I didn't understand labs 20 years ago. Let's really look at your labs, and let's attack estrogen, and let's possibly look at bringing progesterone levels up. Maybe you need some support there. Could we have, maybe we couldn't have reversed it, but could we have stopped it from accumulating and getting worse?
Another thought too, I don't know if she's ever tried yohimbine, but I've seen a couple females that really did well with losing lower body fat with yohimbine. So the estrogen receptor upregulates the alpha adrenal receptor, and yohimbine blocks that, the alpha 2s in particular. So that's one reason why there's a lower body fat distribution tendency among women, is because of what estrogen does in terms of the adrenal receptors there. So that'd be one thing. I mean, she could try just an over the counter and see what it does. It's not going to be magical, but then like Andrew said, an endocrinologist would be the way to go. Get a handle on that.
I'm wondering about an injectable yohimbine, right to the site.
Oh yeah, or a transdermal.
Yeah, or a transdermal.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys hanging to tackle that additional. That was like a bonus question for everybody hanging out at the end of the show, and for Chris, our Patreon subscriber, and for another episode of, I wanted to almost say Muscle Minds. I was getting ready to say Muscle Minds of Blood, Sweat, and Gear. Guys, we'll see you soon.
Blood, Sweat, and Muscle Minds.
Muscle, sweat, and gear.